Hey, this is Anney.
And Samantha.
And welcome to Stuff I Never Told You, a production of iHeartRadio. And today we have another edition of Female First, which means we are once again joined by the fabulous, fantastic Yves. Welcome, Yves.
Yay. Hey, y'all. What's up?
Yeah, we've missed you. We didn't get to connect last month, but we're so happy to have you again. And we were talking off mic, but one of the reasons that we didn't get a Female First last month was you were doing a lot of travel, which we had discussed on the last Female First. How did that go? Did you get any inspiration?
You know, the travel went really well. And I actually did get inspiration because I went to a Caribbean island, specifically the one of Jamaica, last month. And I had a good time there. It was really lovely to spend time in the sunlight around so much water. I've been really drawn to water lately. And today we will be talking about a person from the Caribbean. So I did get inspiration from that. Like we've talked about on previous episodes, like I like to go places and think about like the people who lived there in the past and learn about them from people if I can. And I really love to get to libraries and bookstores if I can, but it was kind of hard to find those in where I was in Jamaica. We asked some of the people who live there, their recommendations. And I also wasn't there that long, so I couldn't do really any sort of like spend any much more deeper time on that. I was with family. So I didn't get to do as much as I wanted to, but hopefully on a trip back, I can go and like find some more things some texts on some people, hopefully.
Yes. Were you able to unplug from work? Last time we were talking about that and the difficulty of doing that.
No. Okay.
Immediate.
Yeah, y'all can't see me shaking my head solemnly, but I am shaking my head solemnly because I did not. I was able to do it in a very measured way, I will say. I also went to a retreat out of state last month, and I went to Jamaica as well. So both of those were supposed to be like, chill, relaxing. I get some time off, like truly get to unplug. But on both of those trips, I was like, all right, I'm done with the plenary session. Like I'm done with the lecture. Time to go work. Or before I start my day, got to get up to work. Got to make sure I meet this deadline. And I did a lot less of that in Jamaica than I did on my retreat. So I did, like the hours weren't so burdensome of the amount of work that I did then. So I have no complaints. And I was like, I got to do it with my legs up on a patio by a pool,
Yeah.
In the Caribbean sunlight. So, I'm not, who am I to complain about that?
So not a complete loss is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Right. Yes. Yes. Well, I am so glad you're bringing this story today, Yves. This is another one I had not heard, and I can't believe I hadn't heard. So who are we talking about today?
Today we are talking about Marie-Louise Christophe, also known as Marie-Louise David. So she was the first and only queen of the independent Haiti. And that's what we're talking about. So I said, we're talking about Caribbean. We're talking about Haiti specifically today. And yeah, I'm really excited to get into it.
Yes, it is quite the history. And I'm looking forward to hearing more about it, because a lot of times Samantha and I will do kind of a preliminary research just so we know what we're talking about, can kind of keep up. But this one was difficult to find some sources, especially like in early days.
Yes.
So I'm very excited to hear. I'm sure it was difficult for you.
Yes, it was. And that is the case for researchers who are far more deep into her biography than I am as well. So you are not alone. I am not alone. But as we always talk about here on Sminty, on Female First specifically, just because we don't know a lot about a person doesn't mean their story isn't worth bringing to the forefront. That's the case for Marie-Louise David, because she has a history in Haiti, which obviously Haiti's story deserves upliftment. And when we talk about history and we talk about the history of Black people and independence and women's roles in movements for independence and resistance movements. And she also has a history of traveling the world, but the difficulty in her story is that she doesn't have there aren't many of her own personal writings left. So not only do we not know as much about her earlier life, it's like we don't know a lot from her own perspective about what her life was like. And those are often, and not necessarily the most engaging parts, but when you get to learn the smaller details of somebody's life and how they view the world, that's where we really get to understand people, I think, on a bit more empathetic level outside of just, oh, this is their first, this is their accomplishment. And unfortunately, we don't have a lot of that from her, but still, her story deserves to be known and heard.
Yes, absolutely. Well, with that said, shall we get into the history?
Yeah, let's do it. So she was born in Cap Francais, which is now Cap Haitien, which is a town on the northern coast of Haiti. And her birthday is listed as May 8th, 1778. And she was reportedly born free. So details are fuzzy, like we were just talking about. You'll see in some sources that it said her father was the owner of a hotel, but that is very dubious information. She had siblings, but there are also questionable facts surrounding who some of them were, how many of them there were. But she had her first child when she was 16 years old, and she was married to Marie-Louise Christophe, and that's where we get her last name, Christophe. So the Haitian Revolution is a big part of her story. It started in 1791, which was a little bit over a decade after she was born. And the revolution ended in 1804. And Marie-Louise, she married Henri Christophe, her husband, around 1793. So that was a couple of years after the revolution popped off. I'm not so sure about the details of her marriage. Like, I would like to know a little bit more about that. Like, really how they met, what their marriage was like, some of those details, because Henri Christophe was a pretty big figure in Haiti and the Haitian Revolution. But I couldn't find much of that. I don't think a ton of that exists in general, but I would love to know more about that because, her first is rooted in Henri Christophe, which we'll get to in a second. But Henri, we do know that he supported Toussaint Louverture and started fighting the French, the British, and the Spanish in the Revolution. And he eventually became a general in the Revolution. And so just for a little bit about the Haitian Revolution, I'm sure a lot of people, well, let me not assume what everyone knows, but I think one of the biggest facts that people will come across when they're talking about the Haitian Revolution is that it was the only time enslaved people and free people of color fought for their independence from colonization and succeeded. And that resulted in a nation that was led by formerly enslaved people and free people of color. Of course, there was a huge upheaval after this, one that continues to resonate till today. Jean-Jacques Dessalines, who was a formerly enslaved Black man, became the first emperor of Haiti after independence, but he was assassinated in 1806. So there was instability after the end of the revolution politically. Haiti was soon split into two, and that was the state of Haiti in the north, and that was the Republic of Haiti in the south. So that's a little bit on the Haitian Revolution, just understanding the context of Marie and how she was coming up in Haiti, because she was still relatively young at this time, and the context in which Marie-Louise's and Henri Christophe's marriage was. I mean, he became a general in the revolution. He was putting a lot of his energy and efforts and time toward the revolution during the time he was married with Marie-Louise. So all in all, though, they ended up having 4 children, 2 sons and 2 daughters. And her oldest son died under the guardianship of the French government in 1805. And so there is a little bit on Henri Christophe as well. He ruled the northern half of Haiti, the state of Haiti. And in 1811, the state of Haiti became a kingdom, and Henri proclaimed himself as king. And this is what made Marie-Louise the first queen of independent Haiti. So this is where her first comes in. And Henri, he believed a single hereditary ruler would be the best move for Haiti. So he set up this whole elaborate hereditary nobility, and he instituted and enforced a system of labor on plantations where workers didn't make wages, and instead they got a fourth of the gross product that was free from duties. His government also captured ships with enslaved people on them and liberated them. And Henri was in regular contact with British abolitionists. He had artists, scientists, and English teachers brought to Haiti to teach students. So even though I'm not exactly sure what his marriage to Marie-Louise looked like in great detail, they definitely lived a lavish lifestyle. I've seen that he apparently had mistresses. I don't want to read too much in that. I mean, I'm here for the drama and stories a lot of the time. But it's really not that integral to the story we're telling about Marie-Louise today, okay? Because they are not her. But by 1820, Henri's health wasn't great and people were uprising against his rule. And on October 8th, 1820, Henri died by suicide. And I don't want to focus too much on Marie-Louise Christophe's story. He does, people can go research more about his story. There is far more detail about his story. People can look up some of why they were uprising against his rule. There are records of the types of systems that he instituted, why people didn't like what he was doing, why people did like his rule. There's a lot more information on the political ins and outs of his biography. So that is also fascinating. And I think in its own right can show give us a little bit more insight into Marie-Louise as well, and how her marriage might have been to him, and also maybe some of the way she thinks and some of her perspectives. So I think his biography is worthwhile looking into in that regard on its own, but also if you're more interested in Marie-Louise. But I just didn't want to belabor it too much today because this is about Marie-Louise. So right after Henri died by suicide, her youngest son was assassinated. And after the death of her husband and her son, she and her daughters went into exile. So now her two sons are deceased and her two daughters are still alive. So they all went into exile. And at first, she was sheltered in Port-au-Prince in Haiti, but she soon got protected passage to be able to go to London in exile. And she went to England in September of 1821. So another major contextual point here is about the Industrial Revolution. So another revolution happening, a very different kind. But I know that y'all have talked about this era on Sminty before. And it was very polluted there in London. There was a lot of change that was happening. But when they got there, they stayed at Osborne's Hotel. And then abolitionist Thomas Clarkson invited them to stay at his home, which was Playford Hall in Suffolk. And he expected them to stay about a month, but they ended up staying for months, which is something he commented on in a letter he wrote to someone. He was like, yeah, I didn't know, I wasn't planning on them staying this long, but they did, which is honestly relatable because, sometimes you invite people over out of the kindness of your heart to stay. You're like, I'm so hospitable. And then you get sick and tired of them being in your space.
You're like, you got going home now? How about now?
Are you not, like, your home is my home, But also,
what?
This is also my home. So, yeah. But he does talk about how they ended up growing on him. He wrote in a letter to another abolitionist that their, quote, amiable dispositions and gentle and correct manners occasion them daily to grow in our love and esteem, end quote. So I feel like, from my contemporary perspective, I acknowledge that is coming from 2024, but I feel like it was a compliment, and also there is a twinge of respectability in this where he's like, Well, because, they're not hooting and hollering and they're not all over the place and they're very well contained is kind of what it was saying to me in a way that, we can handle it, which I think I might just be particularly sensitive to it, knowing that they were Black, because the idea of like a white person placing that level of like, I accept you because you're respectable, it just like rubs me a certain way. But I also think that like they moved to England and they were royalty from Haiti and they were Black. And this was, she and her family, they were not everyday people. So there's a lot of that wrapped up in there. But anyway, Clarkson also said about the Christophs, quote, if they themselves feel something of shyness respecting abolitionists, it arises from their fear of being confounded with Africans. I can pity their weakness. I have observed that very few persons can bear to be reminded of any circumstances in their history which may be thought degrading. So it is clear that they are coming to this new place. People recognize where they came from and their history. And there's also a distinction of them from other Africans or Black people, which is like they're of a different class, they are of nobility, and they're from this faraway place. But it was during this time that Marie-Louise and her family were at Clarkson's home and in England that she kind of got her ducks in a row. She sold some jewelry. She got money that her husband left behind, and she had a good amount of cash to live comfortably on. So I don't think it's known exactly how much money she had, but there was no record of her having struggled monetarily, economically throughout the rest of her life. So it seems that with the money that she did have and the resources that she did have and the connections that she had, she was able to live pretty comfortably for her entire life after her husband died. And it is also notable that the anti-slavery movement and abolitionism was very heavy. Like it was a big thing in Britain at the time. But Marie-Louise doesn't seem to have been too involved in that movement, or at least there's no record of her going to anti-slavery meetings while she was there, even though her history is so wrapped up in the Haitian Revolution. And I think there's speculation around why that was the case, what it looked like for her to be involved in her safety and her already being a strange person in a strange land. I know there are so many considerations that a Black person would have had to have in thriving and surviving the way in her situation in exile in Europe at the time. So I could only imagine, the permutations in her mind around the issue, but there's only speculation about why that was the case. But in April of 1822, the family left Playford Hall and they went to Blackheath, which is an area in Southeast London. And they weren't there long. Soon they moved to West Hill and Hastings. One of Marie-Louise's daughters wrote that the climate was milder in Hastings and that it was helping Marie-Louise's rheumatism. So them being in different places in England seemed to have been something that might have been ordered from them for a doctor because of different conditions that they had. But also, the Industrial Revolution was happening at a time. So certain places when they were closer to the coast or when they were in cities could have different effects on their health. And that seemed to be a consideration when they were moving. And their presence was highlighted in various newspapers, these Haitians that had come to England as Haitian royalty. But she did end up leaving England in September of 1824, which is about 3 years after she got there. And after that, she never came back, but she did stay in Europe. So she went to Salzburg, Austria, she went to Rome, and she went to Pisa. One of her daughters, Atanair, died from respiratory illness in 1831. And her other daughter, Amethyst, died from an injury that she got after falling in 1839. So she lost a lot of her family members, her husband and all of her children before she died. So I could only imagine the level of grief that she had for losing everybody around her, and in unexpected and tragic ways. I because like I said, there are no personal reflections from her on this. I don't really know too much about how she responded on an emotional level, what her day to day was like after her family members passed away. Um, so I would like to know more about that too, because there are all these groundbreaking moments in her story with her husband and her becoming the first queen. She's seeing independent Haiti, seeing that change. That's so huge. And then she moves to England, and that's a big deal. And there aren't many people like her around. And there's this new language, all of these major changes. And at the same time, she's having these personal tragedies happen in her life. I would really love to know her thoughts on that and how she handled it. But alas, we don't have those things. But she did write a letter to the president of Haiti, Jean-Pierre Boyer, asking if she could return to her country. So I think I can pull from that there was a bit of homesickness that she had. I mean, she wanted to go back home. She did say that she really liked England and she would have stayed there. I think if it were not for, I believe she said if it weren't for the climate conditions and like the pollution conditions, that the effects that it had on health. But she wanted to go back to her home country, Haiti, although she never ended up doing so. Her sister, Louisa Coy David Perrault, she was the wife of General and later President Jean-Louis Perrault of the Republic of Haiti, who also, if people would like to, he has his own history as well. That's interesting that people could research. But Louisa was going to go back to Haiti with Marie-Louise, but that never happened. So Marie-Louise died in March of 1851 in Pisa. That's where she's buried. And in 2019, Dr. Nicole Wilson recovered a transcription of Marie-Louise's will at the UK National Archives. So Dr. Nicole Wilson has done quite a bit of research on Marie-Louise's history. Dr. Nicole Wilson was a research fellow at the Institute for Black Atlantic Research at the University of Lancashire. She was also principal investigator at Femme Rebelle, which is a research project about women in the Haitian Revolution and their narratives of resistance. And Marie-Louise's will is a 5-page document. If you go to Dr. Wilson's website, if you search Femme Rebelle, then you can find the will and read it. And in 2022, Dr. Wilson was also involved in having a plaque put up that honored Marie-Louise. It was put up at her former home at 49 Weymouth Street in London, which is the last place that she lived in England. And that same year, later on, there was another plaque that was put up honoring her in Hastings, another place she lived while she was in England. And in an article that Dr. Wilson wrote for History Today, she says about Marie-Louise that, quote, her story is one of relative privilege, rendering her revolutionary trajectory more complicated and, to some, less radical. And I just wanted to talk about that quote because, yes, like were a lot of people with far fewer resources and privileges than Marie-Louise had in Haiti that were not able to move overseas, who were working on the plantations, who died in difficult ways, who had a lot more trouble taking care of their families, who lived in a lot less comfortable positions. So I think there is context around that too that is worthy of talking about. But Marie-Louise's story is still so wrapped up in the Haitian Revolution and Haiti's independence. So a lot of things to think about, I think, with Marie-Louise's story. Yeah, and that's her life.
I love with these female first that you always do such a good job of presenting like the complexities of a person, even if we don't have all of the information. But it is a story of tragedy and upheaval and revolution and having these privileges and all of that in one person. And it's really fascinating. And I do wish there's so many rabbit holes that I do wish we knew more. There's so much I want to research about after this. But it's also an example I found in this, a great example of people still doing that work and still researching, because a lot of the stuff around her, like the plaques, that was pretty recent. That was like, a lot of them were saying this is like a pandemic project that I had or something like that. So I find that always inspires me, and I'm glad people are doing that work so we can hear these stories and remember these stories, as complicated as they may be.
Yeah. And I think one thing that it was difficult for me in reading her story and not having a lot of her personal thoughts about it, having so many other people's words in it, that was difficult for me, is that when you look at it from the outside, and because we don't have a lot of her responses, it kind of looks like a pat existence, like in a way. Like, yes, we understand the deaths, but I think it's kind of hard to connect to those deaths and really understand the weight of them. It's like, okay, people died around her, but like it was the Haitian Revolution, it was the 1800s. Like we know people die, without some of those specific details on how she felt about it. And only seeing like she was a royal. They built a palace. Okay, she lived in. Like she went to England. She got safe passage there. She didn't die of tuberculosis. Like, I mean, was she doing okay? You know?
Right.
So it kind of looks like that. It can kind of look like that without me knowing the specific details. I'm like, I really want to know more, because that is so easy, I think, when we look at stories from the past that we don't know a lot about, to fall into that. And that's why I want to know so much more about how she felt, because I don't want to just have to read between the lines to know how she felt, because like her story is a Black story, which no matter where at this time would have been a difficult one. But we don't even know when she was in England, what kind of stare she got, what did people say to her? What did people do to her when she was in England? Despite the fact that she was royalty in this far off land that a lot of people there in England had never been to, had never seen someone of her stature and her color, all of those kinds of things, that I really would like to know about some more about those gaps in her story. So yeah, shout out to all of the researchers like Dr. Wilson and all of the other people who are looking more into her story, because her story is her own, but it's also, like we mentioned, some of these men that we talked about in today's episode who were involved in the Haitian Revolution, but also a lot of the other women in the Haitian Revolution and women in like anti-colonial resistance around the world and in British holdings, and like just in general, like that we can connect her story to. And I think that is a powerful part of her story as well, despite the fact that we don't know a lot about it.
Yes. And we always appreciate you, Yves, for doing this research and giving us this context and bringing these important stories to us. So thank you. We're glad to have you back.
Happy to be here as always.
Yes. Where can the good listeners find you?
Y'all can find me you can just go to yvesjeffcoat.com and you can get to all of the places. But if you want to go straight to Instagram, you can go to Not Apologizing. That is pretty much the only social media platform that I really engage with in any way. You can also find me on many other episodes of Female First right here on Sminty, talking about women in history. And you can find me on Theme, which is a podcast about Black storytelling in all of its forms.
Yes. And go check it out, listeners, if you haven't already. Thanks again, Yves, for being here. Listeners, if you would like to contact us, you can. Our email is stuffmediamomstuff@iheartmedia.com. You can find us on Twitter at MomStuffPodcast, or on Instagram and TikTok at Stuff I've Never Told You. We're on YouTube. We have a TeePublic store, and we have a book you can get wherever you get your books. Thanks as always to our super producer Christina, our executive producer Maya, and our contributor Joey.
Thank you.
And thanks to you for listening. Stuff I Never Told You is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, you can check out the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcast, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.